Time to break down offense. Florida State's 2025 depth chart. We're getting to the skill positions. We're talking receivers, and this is going to be a dense discussion. A lot of names here for Florida State. It's a battle in spring and in fall camp for a few starting jobs under new offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn. Talking with me, as he's doing for this entire series, is Irish Rafael, managing editor, Warchant.com. He has all of these individual position breakouts available on Warchant.com. We'll put a link in the comments for you to find the full article on the site with a nifty, Ira, I should mention this, a nifty breakout and chart for all of the positions. That's a very nice, organized way for people to consume the data. That is much appreciated, sir.
Yeah, we got to use the table tool every once in a while, and it's really helpful in this situation because not only do you have 12 or 13 receivers, but then you have new guys coming in, you got freshmen coming in, you've got some returning guys, some players at that position who've left, so it's hard to keep track. And really, I think that as much as anything we do this offseason, I think these kinds of pieces where we really kind of help people familiarize themselves with what this roster looks like, I think is really important.
This is going to be fun because there are a lot of points here. Who did they add? Who stuck around? Did everybody stick around? And what about some of those freshmen that they signed, one of which was spoken very highly of on the early signing day, and then the coach interviews subsequent when Gus Malzahn was introduced to the media. More on that in a minute, but let's get to the additions. It started with a near and dear to our hearts namesake. The Robinson family now is a part of the Florida State football program for a second time as Deuce Robinson transfers from USC to Florida State. He was joined in the transfer portal by Squirrel White, it's the opposite type of player from Deuce Robinson, who's 6'6", 220 pounds. Squirrel is 5'10", 167, has some serious skills in the return game, as well as traditionally at receiver, over 1,600 yards receiving, Ira, in college in his career. And then a JUCO guy, another tall receiver, Johnny Wilson Light 2.0. We don't know. Jordan Scott, 6'7", 215 pounds. Ira, just talk to me about these three new guys that are on campus and your thoughts about what Florida State is bringing in to help themselves on offense in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's, they've done really good work there. I think when you look at what they had, a receiver last year, it just was not good enough, clearly. And, there's some guys that they invested a lot of time in, 3, 4, 5 years. Some of those guys were in the program and just never really developed. That's probably part of the reason Ron Dugans is no longer on Florida State's coaching staff. But also, they had to get better players to start with. And, they actually had a nice recruiting class last year. We liked some of those young guys. But they had, and you've been waiting for some of those guys to develop, and maybe they will develop this year. But they had to go out and get some proven players, and they definitely did that. Deuce Robinson, I think over the 2 years at Southern Cal had about 40 catches for around 750 yards. I think 7 touchdowns. Big play threat, huge target, which I think Thomas Castellanos is going to love. As you said, as we've talked about a lot, Castellanos was important in that recruitment. And I think he was probably as excited as Mike Norvell was to get Deuce Robinson in the fold. And I think it's going to be great for Deuce Robinson because he gets to be kind of the WR1 here. At Southern Cal, they had a lot of really talented, Lincoln Riley had recruited at a super high level. They had a lot of really talented skill guys. And Deuce played well, and he played a key role for that offense, but he will be kind of wide receiver 1 here at Florida State. And, that comes with pressure. It comes with expectations, but it's also a great opportunity for him. And I think he's really excited about it. And Squirrel White, the numbers jump off the page. As you said, a couple of years ago at Tennessee, he had 60 something catches, very productive. Now, the one thing I would say about him is, he is, as you said, he's a smaller guy. He's not necessarily going to be a wide receiver 1 type. I'm not 100% sure he's a wide receiver 2 type. I think he needs to be that slot guy that really takes advantages of the mismatches he gets because he's not going to be guarded by the top corner on the other team's defense. And from that standpoint, I think he really fits in well. I think he and Deuce Robinson are a great combination, but I do think they really need that other receiver to open up. When you look at Gus Malzahn's offenses, they play a lot of 3 wide receivers. And, I think for Squirrel White to become what he was earlier in his career at Tennessee, first of all, he has to stay healthy. He had injuries last year. But the other thing is Deuce Robinson and then whoever that number 2 receiver is really have to play at a high level, I think, to get the best out of a guy like Squirrel White.
No doubt. And that position, what you're talking about, that open position opposite of Deuce, if you're in a 2 wide receiver set, It is wide open because last year the production wasn't there. A new position coach to take a look at the problem, and Tim Harris Jr. He comes with Gus Malzahn from UCF, and he'll be taking a look at these guys looking to develop what he can from a Hakeem Williams, who, again, showed flashes last season. He got hurt in fall camp before the season started. It looked like he was trending towards maybe a breakout season. Didn't quite happen. But then, Ira, a host of players now that are going to be redshirt freshmen or sophomores for Florida State, like a Lawayne McCoy, Elijah Moore, Camden Fryer, who was hurt last season. Jalen Brown's going to be in that discussion, B.J. Gibson. A lot of names battling for essentially what I think you're saying, and I agree with, one starting spot.
Yeah, and and as you mentioned, like Jordan Scott, you mentioned him at the beginning, the junior college transfer also is a guy that, was not super productive at the junior college level, but he does bring great measurables. I mean, they have the size of this receiving core cannot be questioned. I mean, they have got a bunch of big dudes with big catch radiuses, and that's exciting. Hakeem Williams is viewed as a big-bodied receiver. I think a lot of people think he's 6'4" or 6'5". He's 6'2". But he's got some length about him, and he's definitely has a physical ability, and you love him to be that number 2. In the early depth chart that we put on the website, we have him as the starting wide receiver at that other spot, just because he's proven more than anybody else. But as you said, he came out of high school with a ton of hype because of the measurables, because of what he looks like and because of what he did in some camps. But he played in a really weak offense in high school, not a good football team, and was not polished at all. So he's really had to learn these last 2 years how to play wide receiver. He's had the injuries he's dealt with. So you're kind of waiting for that finally to emerge. There's no question. I think he's a hard worker. I think he's trying. I think he wants to be good. But we haven't seen it yet. We just haven't seen it consistently at Florida State. So that would be huge if this offseason, if he emerges. But if he doesn't, like you said, man, there's some of those young talent. Of all the things to complain about with this football team a year ago, I thought one of the most promising things was the talent in the young wide receiver room, the skill position room, a couple of the young running backs as well, and the talent in the young secondary. And I think now's the time. Elijah Moore, as you mentioned, some of those other, redshirt freshman wide receivers now, Lawayne McCoy and those guys. And then you have this true freshman class. Javon Boggs caught, 1,000 passes last season in high school. I mean, some insane amount he's an insanely productive receiver. So they've got a lot of bodies to throw at it, and they have a new position coach and a new offense. I think that's one of the kind of X factor in this that I'm really interested to see. One of the challenges for receivers in Mike Norvell's offense is because it's so timing-based and read-based. Quarterbacks and the receivers really had to be on the right page. They had to make the same decisions. They had to be on point with each other. And a lot of times that it took receivers a long time. It seemed like to me, it took a lot of these receivers a while to kind of figure it out. Some of them have left without ever figuring it out. Gus Malzahn's offense, I believe, is going to be a little bit simpler. I think it's going to be maybe easier for those guys to learn. Maybe he teaches it better. Maybe Tim Harris and those guys teach it better. And if that's the case, then maybe some of these really young guys can step up and emerge and challenge a Hakeem Williams.
Our sponsor for today's video is State Farm agent Russ Vorhis, a longtime Noles supporter of Warchant.com, supporter of Florida State athletics top to bottom. Russ is outstanding in the field of insurance. He covers you with his friends at State Farm, state of Florida, state of Georgia, state of Alabama. If you live in any of those 3 states, Russ Vorhis can cover you. If you like supporting Noles, who support what we do, that's exactly what Russ Vorhis is, Ira. He's as big of a Nole, literally and figuratively, as there is out there.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be in a better disposition this season. Last season was tough on Russ, like a lot of Florida State fans, and you can tell that. But yeah, I mean, we really recommend him highly. He's a good guy. Really cares about Florida State fans. If you do reach out to Russ Vorhis insurance company and you reach out to their offices in person or over in Jacksonville or on the phone, if you're anywhere in the tri-state area, you can. If you mention you heard about him on Warchant. They appreciate that. They like knowing that they're helping fellow Noles. And I actually saw Russ post on social media the other day that they may be doing some hiring. So I think business is booming. I think things are going well over at Russ Vorhis Insurance. So people need to check them out.
For those of you that are listening on the pod version of this, I'll spell his name out. That's the website, russvorhis.com, RUSSVORHIS.com, russvorhis.com. Awesome guy. Awesome Nole. Does Gus rotate at receiver? I mean, there's only one football, and in this offense, that football is going to the running back a heck of a lot more than the receiver. Going to be interesting to see what happens after spring camp shakes out, the depth chart shakes out from spring camp.
Yeah, and again, I think they'll pass a little bit more than people expect. Again, I think that especially with Castellanos and some of these targets they brought in, I also think another kind of sign of the fact that they do want to throw the ball is what they did at tight end. And we'll talk about the tight ends another time. But you bring in, you already have two super talented young tight ends in Amari Williams and Landon Thomas. You bring in Randy Pittman. You bring back Marquise and Douglas. I really do think they want to throw the football. As you said, they got to run the ball first, and that's going to open things up in the passing game. And as far as the rotation goes, yeah, man, you're not going to keep all these guys. It's college football in 2025. And the reality is if guys don't work onto the too deep early in their career, a lot of times they're going to be looking for another place to play. So it's going to be hard to keep all these guys without question. It's not going to be the old days when guys would sit and wait their turn. But, I do think if the nice thing about having those numbers to start with is, again, you have options. And I felt like, I don't know, there's a couple of, one young guy, I threw on my depth chart, even though he's a walk-on, Willie Suarez, who came in last year as a freshman. I want to see how Gus Malzahn, how open he and Tim Harris are to new faces and what a fresh start gives guys, because I really felt like, man, one of the complaints I had about that team last year was I felt like Mike Norvell and Ron Dugans had invested so much time in some of those older wide receivers that they really wanted it to work with those guys and maybe didn't look enough and push maybe some of those younger guys. And I want to see everybody get a wide open, fresh start, clean slate. And I'm curious to see if some of those young guys can kind of emerge and knock off maybe older guys, because nobody in that room has really done a whole lot of anything.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say you're happy with the clean slate here, Ira,
Yes,
at this position.
Very, very much. I think we've made that point clear.
Yeah, we all have our position groups at warchant.com where we're saying, okay, nothing against the kids that left, but it's been the same dudes for 3 or 4 years. Can we see what happens here with some new blood? Maybe they get open. That's what people are rooting for: separation, receivers being open. We're going to document that on warchant.com, Warchant TV, all winter and spring long. And we do have newcomer interviews coming to the channel. We need to remind you of that starting on Tuesday of this week, Thursdays for the next month. So as these new transfers are available, Squirrel White, for example, is going to be available to the media this Tuesday. Get to know these players a little bit more. We're going to be documenting it for you on Warchant TV.